In today's video, I want to talk about 5 things that I wish I had known when I started my healing journey, when I really consciously made the choice to dive in, okay? Because for me personally, I was at a point in my life where, I really hit rock bottom and I didn't really know where to start or what to expect as an example, right? How to start, where to go, what to expect. And these are things that I wish I would have known before. And of course, each individual will have their own subjective experience, their own wounding, okay? It could be as an example that that you are aware of your childhood trauma, that you're understanding that at this point in life, it's really impacting you, right? It's really impacting your life, your ability to be present, your ability to plan for a future. It's impacting your relationships, and it could be, different things as well. It could be that you have lost a significant other in your life, right? It could be, as an example, your partner. It could be the loss of someone in your family and you're grieving, and, maybe it's been a while and you're still having a lot of difficulties, which is very understandable, okay? But maybe you feel like you're not seeing that light at the end of the tunnel. So in this video today, I really want to share some tips that, I've learned along the way with my own journey, with client work as well, in hopes to help you get to that next level on your healing journey. The first thing that I wanted to share today is very important, and that is that healing is possible, okay? I know that sounds very simple and it really sounds very simplistic on the surface, but I want to plant that seed of awareness into your mind right now, because I think for a lot of us, speaking from my own experience here, when I was going through my dark night of the soul, when I was going through what I would consider to be my rock bottom at a certain point in my life, which I've shared my story before, I really couldn't see that light at the end of the tunnel, right? And I thought, I've been like this for so long that there's no way out for me, okay? There's legitimately no way out for me, and I'm not even sure how I'm going to get through this, right? So in my mind, healing wasn't possible, right? And this is something I've noticed with clients as well. It's, at the beginning, they reach out and, they don't know where to go. They don't know what to start. They don't know what to do, okay? And they think that it's not possible for them, right? Maybe there's a lot of factors here. It could be that they're too old, and you're never too old to start healing. I just want to be very clear about that. It could be that they're feeling too old, or they've got too much wounding, or they've never done this type of work, so they don't know what to expect, as an example, right? All very, very valid. And I think for a lot of us as well, a part of it is that we think that we're broken. We think that there's something wrong with us. We think that we're some kind of project that needs to be fixed. And sometimes because we think that we're broken, I'm going to speak from my own experience here. I had a lot of trouble reaching out for help, okay? Because I was like, well, I don't want people to think I'm broken. I don't want my therapist to think I've got all these different issues. So I kept a lot of things to myself, right? And, that's the furthest thing from the truth. I think asking for help and reaching out for help is the bravest thing someone can do. For me personally, I have trouble even putting this into words, but when a client has reached out to me for help, as an example, I think that is the most courageous and bravest thing someone can do, right? Where you're at a point in your life where you're like, I can't take this anymore. I really want to lead a better quality of life. I want to unconsciously stop bleeding on other people. And I just want an overall sense of peace in my life, right? And I think that is the bravest thing someone can do, to really decide and take the step and reach out to someone and ask for help. So if you're listening to this and you're on the fence about it, please, and I'm going to talk about this later on as well, but please do reach out, right? Because again, you are not broken at all. You're not something that needs to be fixed. You're a human being. You're going through an experience, and that is completely valid, and that is completely okay as well. And this leads me to my second point, which is that there is no such thing as being fully healed, in my personal opinion. I truly don't believe that there's anything like being fully healed, where we reach a point in our lives where we are 100% healed, we have no issues, all these different things, right? And I think for a lot of us, this is something I've heard before. We stop ourselves from kind of living life because we're not fully healed yet, right? One thing I've heard from clients and just from other people is oh yeah, I'm healing right now, and I'm not going to get into a relationship with someone until I'm fully healed, right? Well, in my personal opinion, you're going to wait forever, right? Because I genuinely don't think that there is such a thing as fully healed. I think obviously if you want to do some inner work before getting into a relationship, I think that's beautiful. But I think a relationship will also act as a mirror, allowing you to further understand yourself, your projections, all these different things, right? And I think it could be, I think it can serve as a catalyst to your growth for both partners, right? If you come into a relationship consciously together and you're like, hey, I've got wounding, but I'm working on it. That person also has wounding, but they're working on it. And then you work on it together. I think that's an accelerated amount of growth that you can do, right? Now, obviously, it's not always easy, but I'm just saying that you don't need to be fully healed. And I think the thing about healing is that it's a journey, okay? And like any journey, it's linear. I think of it like a hospital chart, if you will, right? Like it's up and down and up and down. In our healing journeys, we will have ups and downs. We will have good days and bad days. And that's completely okay. And that's what you need to expect as well. Okay. And I think the problem sometimes can be that we think that as we're going through our healing journey, we're going to get to a specific destination where we are permanently happy. Okay. Sometimes, like a term that I've read a lot about in different books that I've read is like enlightenment, right? So being fully enlightened where we don't have to worry about anything else. A lot of like spiritual teachers are enlightened and they're like almost, it's basically making it sound like 100% healed, right? Personally, I don't really buy that perspective. And I also don't think it's very realistic for 95% of people, right? In my personal opinion, I don't think anyone can truly be enlightened. And secondly, I think kind of it could be very misleading for a lot of people because then we think like, okay, well, if I do this inner work and I do all these different things, then I'm going to be 100% healed. I'll never have any other issues, right? And that could be further from the truth. I think what happens is that we become better equipped, right? So we've got kind of a tool belt or a toolkit, whatever you want to call it. And as we go through our healing journey, we learn about ourselves. We learn about what we need to let go of. We learn about new techniques and regulation modalities, all these different things, right? We get more tools on our toolkit. And then, of course, when something happens, we're better equipped to handle those situations. But I think that it's just sometimes it can be very misleading where people think that you're going to reach a permanent state of happiness, right? And for me personally, in my personal opinion, I don't think that's the thing at all, right? I think that you will still have moments of sadness. You will still have moments of anger, of frustration, all these different things. But I also think that's what makes us human, right? For me personally, I couldn't imagine living in a life where I never experienced sadness because I think sadness is what brings meaning to happiness, right? You don't know happiness if you've never been sad and vice versa, okay? So I think that these things are all part of a normal human experience. And I think sometimes what can happen as well, especially in our societies, we've kind of labeled emotions, if you will, right? We've got good emotions, we've got bad emotions, we've got negative emotions, all these different things. So, and a lot of us, and maybe through childhood, we were taught that anger is bad, we've suppressed our anger, but just the overall talk sometimes I feel like is like emotions are negative and they're not negative, right? Anger is very important. Anger is an extremely important emotion that you can learn to channel creatively. It helps you be able to assert yourself, to stand up for yourself, right? Doesn't mean that you hit someone, but it's allowing you to be more assertive as an example, right? Even things like shame and guilt, right? Obviously, there is a talk about toxic shame where, toxic shame is being very detrimental to yourself, and that's not necessarily good, but toxic shame can also be kind of an eye-opener and an indicator that something needs attention, right? So that's what I'm saying. Like all our emotions are there for a reason. They're guiding us for a purpose, and they're asking us to look at something. If, for example, I'm just going to give a hypothetical scenario. If, as an example, you have cheated on someone, okay, which I personally don't agree with cheating on people, my subjective opinion here, but if you've cheated on someone and you feel guilty about doing that, but you also feel ashamed that you've done that, to me personally, I think that is healthy guilt, and I think that is healthy shame, right? And I think that is pointing in the right direction that, hey, maybe you did something wrong there, right? And then you own up to that, you take accountability for that as an example. So this is really what I'm trying to say. But again, healing is a very difficult thing, right? It's a very difficult thing. And I want you to understand that. I want you to be prepared for that. It's not a simple thing, and it's not something that you're going to do depending on what you're working on and working through. It's not something that you're going to do in 2 months. If, as an example, you're 40 years old, you've never worked on your childhood trauma, which is completely okay, by the way, but I'm just setting a realistic expectation here, right? Don't expect to heal everything in 2 months, right? That's not realistic. A realistic timeline for, depending on what it is that you're healing, could be a few years as well, okay? Obviously, each individual will have their own healing journey, and this is another thing as well, right? Healing is hard, but you cannot rush the process because healing looks different for everyone. And sometimes I feel like we can compare our journeys to someone else as an example, right? Like, oh, they've gone through that. They've already healed. Why am I not healed? I must be broken. All these different things. Just don't compare yourself to everyone else because your experience matters, right? Whatever you've gone through or went through, okay, is valid. It was your subjective experience, and whatever you're feeling is completely valid. And sometimes I feel like people, I've heard this before, they deminimize their trauma, they deminimize their situation, their circumstances, right? It's like, oh, it's not that bad. Well, you know what? Maybe it is that bad, right? Maybe it's time for you to truly acknowledge and own up to the fact that, hey, this was very traumatic, right? But now I'm aware of it and I really want to work through that. Okay. But again, it's healing looks different for everyone and you really cannot rush the process. Don't set yourself a timeline to heal. Okay. There's no timeline here, but be realistic that it can take longer, right? Because that's the whole part of it. And again, sometimes I see these things like heal in like 2 weeks or 2 months and, these kind of different things. I generally don't agree with that, right? I think doing inner work will ask a lot of you, right? I'm just being very real with you right now. It asks a lot of a person, but the rewards at the end of it are, extravagant, right? They're amazing because at the end of it, no, you may not reach a state of permanent happiness, but I truly believe that your baseline on how you live every day will be better, will be improved. You'll be more happy. You'll be more at peace. You'll be more joyful, if you will, a lot more than you were before, right? Does not mean you will not experience moments of sadness, moments of anger, all these different things, right? And we have a full spectrum of emotion. In one day, you can be happy, you can be sad, you can be frustrated, you can be tired, like all these different things, right? Like everything happens in a day sometimes, right? Like what I'm trying to say is like emotions can fluctuate a lot during a day as well. So this is what I'm trying to say. It's about being realistic, right? Because when you're going through this, like I said, it can be very hard, right? It's not about sunshines and rainbows, okay? It's tough work and you will be forced to face yourself. You'll be forced to face uncomfortable truths that maybe you've suppressed or repressed for a long time, right? It's kind of like almost as if you are, let's say you had a closet, okay? And for 10 to 20 years, you've kind of just been opening a door and you've been throwing stuff in your closet, but you're never really looking at what is inside the closet, okay? And then at one point you're like, hey, this closet might be overflowing, but you're kind of afraid of opening the door because you don't know what's going to come out, right? There's so much things in that closet that you're afraid, if I open the door, what's going to come out? Am I going to get hit by something? Like what's going to come out, right? And a lot of us, and that's the thing, right? If a lot of things have been suppressed or repressed, well, it can be very hard to start, peeling back those layers. Like I've mentioned this a lot before, but one thing my coach told me was we human beings are like onions, right? So once we start peeling back layers, we find more layers and all these different things, right? So this is why it's so important to take your time with healing, right? There's no destination to get to. You don't need to rush the process. Just please take your time with it. But I just want you to be understanding of the fact that personally, I don't believe there's anything as fully healed. But again, you become better equipped with better tools. And then once something happens in your life, because again, this is the other thing as well, right? There are other things that you have not yet experienced in your life that will happen at a certain point that will, demand your attention, right? Maybe it's going to be a significantly hard event that you're going through, all these different things, but now you're going to be better equipped to handle those situations, right? So again, that's number 2 that I want to share. In my personal opinion, there is no such thing as being fully healed. The third thing that I want to share is that self-awareness can be a double-edged sword. Now, I want to be very clear about this, right? So self-awareness obviously is, I think, one of the most fundamental tools that we can give ourselves, right? To understand ourselves, to understand our beliefs, to understand just our values and everything about ourselves, I think is very important. To understand our trauma, to understand, what we want to heal, what we want to work on, all these different things. I think self-awareness is such a powerful thing, a powerful skill that we can learn and implement in our lives. But one thing that I've noticed with myself and other people that I've talked to, I made a post about this a few months back, and I had a few messages about this, is that sometimes with self-awareness can lead to being self-conscious, because the more self-aware we become, sometimes the more we think we're broken, or the more we think that there's something that's wrong with us or that we need to fix. So once we start digging deeper into ourselves, right, we start collecting information about ourselves. So I'll give you my personal, story about that. But basically, I've shared this before, but when I really started to dive into healing and trying to, understand myself better, the problem was I started collecting all this information. I was listening to podcasts, I was reading books, I was doing all these different things. And at a certain point, it was like this just overwhelming amount of information that I was collecting, and I was collecting. And then I was like, wow, like this person is saying, do this, don't do that. And then you're reading a specific book and all these different things. And then it just made me feel like there was all these things wrong with me, right? Like all these things that I needed to fix, and I didn't even know where to start. And then I got super overwhelmed, right? So that's my caution to you. Once you start diving into self-awareness, I think sometimes, and just not only self-awareness, but just the healing journey, is that sometimes I think we start diving into this and then we just go into kind of like a a deep dive of collecting information, which I think sometimes can be used against us, right? I just want you to be very careful when you're doing that, because again, this is what I mean by self-awareness can be used as a double-edged sword, right? So sometimes, yes, it's important to collect different information to get to know more about yourself, right? Like I did a lot of different things, but if you want to do this properly, right, without going into a spiral of shame like I did, and this is what happened to me, right? It was like I was going through all these things. I was reading books, listening to podcasts, and then all of a sudden I was like, okay, like I just said, right? I think I'm broken. I think there's so much wrong with me. And I started spiraling into the shame. I was like, I've got so much self-awareness in myself, but yet I'm holding on to so much shame, right? And once I really dove into that, one thing that truly helped me was approaching everything with curiosity and self-compassion. I think that curiosity and self-compassion is something that I talk about all the time, and it is for good reason. Because once you're diving into the depths of yourself, like your shadow parts and all these different things, right? Kind of like those skeletons in the closet I was talking about earlier, it can be very difficult, right? You don't always know what you're going to find, and then you're forced to face parts of yourself that maybe you didn't want to own up to before, right? You're going to ask a lot of deeper questions, as an example, right? So maybe, as an example, you're always numbing yourself with weed or with alcohol and such, so now you really have to have that radical, honest conversation about what's keeping you to the bottle, what's keeping you always reaching for that joint, what's keeping you doing these shadow behaviors that you know that aren't good for you, for example, okay? Now, these are all different things that we can do, but if we can learn to approach that with curiosity instead of shame and then self-compassion, obviously, I think this is where you start winning, right? Because for me personally, this is what happened is instead, when I started diving into this, I noticed like this feeling of shame that was always coming up for me. And I started just, as I was diving into this, there was things that I loved finding, and then obviously there were things that I didn't like to find. But something just came over me, and I was like, I need to start looking at this more curiously. Like I'm attacking myself, but I'm just trying to get to know myself. Like, why am I attacking myself, right? And of course, the inner critic can come to play and all these different things. But the thing that I'm trying to say here is the way I kind of viewed this and the way I kind of looked at this all was basically, okay, when you meet someone for the first time, let's say like romantically, I mean, right? When you meet someone for the first time, you're interested in someone, maybe you're going out on a date with someone, you start to get very interested in that person. You're curious about that person. You want to know that person, right? You want to get to know, about them. What do they like to do for fun? Where do they work? What do they do on the weekends? All these different things, right? When you start dating someone, you're genuinely curious. You genuinely want to get to know that person. So why can't we do the same for ourselves? Why can't that be reciprocated towards ourselves? And what I'm trying to say here is basically I kind of started dating myself, quote unquote, right? And it's like, okay, if I can give that attention to someone else, right? And that level of curiosity to someone else, I'm going to give that to myself. And that's for me when the entire thing changed, right? And then this is when self-compassion for me was kind of a byproduct of that, because here's the thing as well. A lot of people talk about self-compassion, but I think self-compassion sometimes can be a byproduct of just healing and understanding your story, right? And then I think you can start having that self-compassion, because sometimes I think forcing self-compassion in yourself, like some people just don't know how to do that, right? And I think self-compassion needs to be something that brews up internally that's very genuine, okay? So for me, as an example, and anyone that's going through this or whatever you're healing, once I started to understand like the story that I've been holding on to wasn't my own, or, that things that happened maybe weren't my fault, or all these different things, that's when genuine self-compassion for myself came through, right? So as an example, if you're someone that went through childhood trauma and whatever happened to you, okay, there could be many different things. You grew up in a very chaotic family dynamic. Maybe there was physical abuse, sexual abuse, all these different things, right? Obviously, first and foremost, if you did go through that, I'm genuinely very sorry to hear that. But also, after a certain point, when you start to understand that what happened to you wasn't your fault, right? It genuinely wasn't your fault. You're a child. You had no control over the circumstances. There's nothing differently you could have done. Then that's when self-compassion starts to brew into you, and for that smaller part of yourself, right? That inner child within, because then you're like, okay, well, there's nothing I could have done differently here, right? There's maybe nothing, and maybe in that point in time, obviously, there's nothing you could have done differently. And that's when I think, for me personally, self-compassion starts to brew. It's when you get an understanding, a true understanding. Again, this is why self-awareness is so good, but to get that true understanding of like, wow, the stories that I've been holding on to isn't my own. Maybe my inner critic that I've been, that's attacking me all the time isn't even my own voice. Maybe it's the voice of a parent, a caregiver, my brother, my sister, whatever it may be, right? But once you start to dive into that, that's really where I think self-compassion is the key, right? So curiosity and self-compassion. So if you find yourself over-consuming right? Just stop for a second. This is what I had to do. I was like, stop and really rethink and maybe like, okay, am I using this at my advantage or is this actually being detrimental to me, right? And even for me personally, again, I was over consuming. I was trying to learn all these different things. But again, this was a form of bypassing. This is the other thing I want to say. I was reading book after book, podcast after podcast. I never did anything with that information though, initially, right? Initially, I didn't do anything with that. So it's almost like I was just like, okay, I'm going to heal myself through intellectualization and just reading and podcasts and whatever. And then I collected all this information. I didn't do anything with it. So obviously, that's not going to be very helpful for me, right? But what I noticed was that I was actually avoiding the work because the work is hard, right? So again, this is what I mean by self-awareness can be a double-edged sword, but curiosity and self-compassion will be your best friends and your allies on this journey. The fourth thing that I want to share with everyone is that healing isn't just emotional or spiritual. It's physical too, okay? This is extremely important because the mind and the body go hand in hand, okay? Your mind and your body go hand in hand. And there is something that's always stayed with me from a book called Letting Go by Dr. David Hawkins. And he said, it is the accumulated pressure of feelings that causes thoughts. One feeling can literally cause thousands of thoughts, right? And that is so, so true. And ever since I read that years ago, I knew that I was missing something with body dynamics, right? Like more somatic, if you will, because it's very true. Sometimes we're overthinking. We've got all these different things, right? And yes, of course, the mind work, if you will, like mindset and everything is very important, but it's also about understanding that a lot of stuff lives in our body as well, right? We've all heard the saying, the body keeps the score, right? So I think this is so, so, so important, especially if you have undergone significant childhood trauma, all these different things, your body will store trauma, right? So it's so important to, in my personal opinion, I think it's like a 50-50 split where you need to, even I would probably say honestly like 60-40, 60 being body work, 40 being talking. Really depends on the individual as well, but at least a 50-50 I would say, where you obviously you need to talk about your stuff, right? You need to talk about your stuff. You need to talk about your childhood trauma. You need to talk about what happened to you. You need to talk to get awareness and get an understanding of your story. And again, like I was talking about earlier, that probably it's not your fault, that the story that you're holding on to isn't your own. And that, once you start to understand these things, then obviously that will be a significant part in healing, right? Talking is amazing. That's not what I'm saying here, right? I'm not discrediting that at all. But also, I think that body work needs to be included, right? The somatic therapy portion of that as well. And I think that you need to implement both in order to truly heal trauma and in order to truly heal anything that you're going through, to be quite honest with you, right? You need to do both. And this is what I want to talk about as well, where, yes, again, like I said, talking is good, body work is good. You combine those two together and boom, right? Talking, somatic, boom. Brilliant, brilliant. Now, the other thing that's very important to learn and to understand, though, is that not everything works for everyone, okay? As you're going through your healing journey, this is what I'm talking about curiosity as well, is that some approaches will work for you and some of them won't work for you. So it's important to try different things. So let's say, and this is what I want to say first and foremost, okay? So I've talked to a lot of people. A lot of people have told me something where, as an example, they've went to therapy or they've gone to see a coach. They didn't feel seen, heard, or understood, and then they just stop, right? Then they just stop. Well, it's like, no, well, maybe that coach or therapist wasn't really meant for you, but it doesn't mean you need to stop, because you can be paired with someone else that truly understands you, truly sees you, and truly wants to help you get through better things, right? And truly wants to help you go from where you are now to where you want to be so that you can live that quality of life. So please, just because something doesn't work initially, please don't quit on your journey, right? Another concept is meditation, right? Meditation, I think, is a brilliant practice. I can't say anything about meditation. I think it's a brilliant practice, but if I'm being honest again, it does not work for everyone, right? Especially if someone is extremely going through a lot of trauma, as an example, right? Extremely traumatized is what I was trying to say. Meditation can sometimes actually be dangerous for that person because they've never really sat with themselves. They don't know how to sit with themselves. They might be an extremely hypervigilant person. As soon as they close their eyes, there might be a lot of suppressed and repressed stuff that tries to come up. And, in my personal opinion, meditation and something like meditation or any work that you do should be, it should be uncomfortable, but never too overwhelming, where to the point where you could actually like re-traumatize yourself is what I'm trying to say, right? So there are different things that will work for different people. So this is what I'm talking about. Again, you need to be curious. You need to try different things. You need to look up different modalities and things that might be of interest to you, right? So as an example, maybe for you, meditation works. Maybe for someone else, it doesn't work, right? But again, meditation has different branches of meditations. There's so many different types of meditation. So just because one type of meditation doesn't work for you, doesn't mean that another one won't, right? So it's really about trying different modalities and seeing what works for you. And then maybe you can incorporate a few of them, right? Some people like journaling. Some people don't like journaling, right? I think journaling is a great thing. And maybe you try meditation and then you do journaling, right? Maybe you meditate and then you journal on your meditation afterwards, or, there's many different ways that you can do this. But also, I think sometimes a combination of a few things can be very impactful as well, right? So it could be something, maybe you've seen the term shadow work and that really kind of stuck out to you, right? Which is, for me personally, that's what it was. And I think a lot of the different things that we do when we're healing is all sorts of forms of shadow work. But, I really kind of aligned and resonated with more Jungian psychology and that kind of stuff. So I really dove into that for me personally. So again, there's different things, right? For some people, internal family systems therapy, right? And maybe you've heard about this parts work, right? So different parts of ourselves, we've kind of got like this internal family where we can talk to our different parts of ourselves. There's, exiles, managers, firefighters, all these different things. It goes into a lot of depth. But again, for some people, maybe they don't really resonate with parts work, right? Maybe it's like, I don't like the idea of having different parts. Some people are like, hey, that seems like a really cool idea. Let me try that. Let me find out more information, right? But again, you can't knock it until you haven't tried it, right? So if you try it, even though you think, I don't know, and you try it and you're like, you know what, this is pretty cool, right? So obviously keep an open mind to different modalities as well, which is what I'm trying to say, right? But again, don't go like crazy trying everything at the same time. Like just do a bit of research on different things that you could try. Like I said, there's many different things, but obviously, if you're really stuck somewhere, for me personally, as you all know, this reading, right? Reading is, I think, my number one modality. I will say so myself. I think the thing about reading is that you can find books to really address whatever it is that you're going through, right? There are different things. Even if you want to dive into specific things, specific topics that you're going through, reading is just, it's amazing, right? Because you read the author's experience, you read the author's, let's say as an example, like it's a psychologist that's had 40 years of work and you read through his book, he's got all these practical tips, all these different things, right? So now you're learning about that from, someone who's been doing it for 40 years. They talk about, client studies and all these different things. And a lot of times they will give you good tools, good questions. And this is what I mean, right? To really help you work through that and incorporate that in your life. So again, there are so many different types of things that you can do. So you need to get curious and you need to try different things, right? But again, just because one form doesn't work, maybe another form works. Right? Another example is breath work, okay? Breath work, there's so many different types of breath work in the world. Maybe something doesn't work for you, maybe something else works for you, right? For me personally, just a quick kind of regulation thing, there's Wim Hof method, there's all these different things. I found those not too complicated, but I just wanted something simple. For me personally, box breathing is the way to go, right? Inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4, right? It's literally a square. It's very easy to remember, something I can do very fast as well. It's not like 4, 7, 8 or all these different types of breathing. Those are good as well. But again, you need to try what works for you, okay? So this is what I'm really trying to encourage you. Find what resonates for you. Another powerful thing that I've done, which I've shared before, I went to a men's retreat, right? Especially I think for men, a lot of us know that for men, it's hard to open up. It's hard to talk about these things, but and there's different retreats, right? There's somatic retreats, not only for men and women. There's some for women only as well. But being in a space, a safe container with a lot of people that you can do somatic breath work with, that you can do different activities with, that encourage movement and all these different things, I think is phenomenal, right? And you're also doing this in a space with other people that are going through similar situations, right? So they kind of act like a mirror, and then you're like, oh my goodness, right? And it's nice to share. It's nice to be able to vulnerably share what you're going through and then realize how many other people are going through maybe not exactly the same thing, but similar experiences and how they're feeling as well. This is what I noticed when I went to my men's retreat. We were 18 guys. I'd never seen these people before, right? And it was just, you go in there and then you share everything about your life, and and there's something definitely for men, right? Speaking as a man myself, there's definitely something about being in a space with 18 men and being able to share everything, right? Without any judgment, like men don't cry and all these different things, being and truly embracing your masculinity, right? I think as a man, true masculinity is being able to embody both the femininity and the masculinity side as well, right? And so this is what I'm saying, try different things. Now, another important thing that I wanted to talk about as well is, okay, so this is very important, right? If you don't know where to start, okay, maybe you're not ready for a therapist or coach yet or all these different things, right? Reading is obviously a great way to start. You can journal, right? And journaling doesn't necessarily have to be specific questions. You can, though. There's obviously a lot of journaling questions online, but maybe you just start kind of writing like in a diary format as an example. But in my personal opinion, if you really want to start something with the healing, again, body work, like I'm talking about, right? Breath work and meditation, all these different things, they're body work, but go back to the absolute basics. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is, how are you sleeping? Are you drinking enough water? Have you drank enough water today, right? How's your nutrition, right? Are you eating at least one nutritious meal a day, okay? When's the last time you went for fresh air in nature? When's the last time you went for a walk or did some form of exercise, right? This is something I cannot stress enough. And this is something in my client work is like 100% like it is 100% mandatory, right? It is 100% mandatory because how do you expect to fully heal when the vessel that you live in, the body that you live in isn't properly nourished, right? To me personally, that is that is the first thing I check with my clients, right? Because I want to know how you're doing on a daily basis, because sometimes when we're feeling very depressed, lethargic, all these different things, we neglect the basics, understandably, very validly so, but we also neglect the basics, right? And I understand sometimes it could be that we're having trouble sleeping and all these different things, but if we start by making sure that we're drinking a few glasses of water each and every day, right? And then we're going for at least a walk outside in nature 3 times a week, okay? And then those things will help you sleep better. And then we're making sure that our sleep, that we're maybe, instead of doom scrolling at night, that we're putting our phone away at night. And this is something I recently did with my client, is like, okay, put the phone away, right? Put the phone at the end of the room or put the phone in another room, use an actual alarm, but make sure that you're not sleeping with the phone right next to you so that you can fall asleep faster, right? Which actually very much helped her. So this is what I'm saying. Go back to the basics. That alone, literally just going back to the basics. And I cannot emphasize this enough, but making sure that you're hydrated, that you're eating properly, right? And obviously you can have your cheat meals and whatever you want to have. That's not what I'm saying, but making sure that you at least have one nutritious meal a day, and that you're making sure that your body's getting what it needs, right? The nutritions that it needs is really what I'm trying to say. That in and of itself will help you tremendously, right? Because sometimes you're having a bad day and such, but sometimes it's like, okay, are you really having a bad day, or did you not just eat, right? Or have you been sitting in a chair all day and you haven't done anything, right? Or maybe you haven't had a glass of water in the last 6 hours, or maybe the last time you went outside was, 3 weeks ago, as an example, right? Maybe the last time you moved your body was 3 weeks ago. And especially for someone, as an example, with like dissociative tendencies, it's very important to ground yourself, right? Especially like with your legs specifically, to get yourself literally grounded back to the floor, right? So going for walks, grounding yourself in nature, the gym, right? Doing leg day, squats, all these different things will help you kind of put yourself back into your body. So this is what I'm trying to say, right? If you don't know where to start, at least start there. What's my basics looking like, right? How am I treating my body? How has my body been? Because if, as an example, you've been going through this for a while now, like really you've been hitting rock bottom for a while now, and you've been neglecting your body for months, then it's going to be very hard to get energy to do anything, right? So start there, start at the basics. So this is what I really want to talk about in tip number 4 that I want to share, is that healing isn't just emotional or spiritual. A big portion of it is physical as well. And last but not least, the 5th and final thing that I wanted to share today is to ask for help, okay? Please ask for help if you really need it. That is why there are professionals. That is why there are coaches and therapists, obviously, that do this for a living to really help people, right? Sometimes we're doing all the right things. We're reading the books. We are reading the books. We're doing the work. We're eating right. We're trying to get adequate sleep and such, but we're still feeling stuck and such. It is completely okay to reach out to someone for help. It is completely okay. And sometimes if you're, even if it's just sometimes a family member or a friend that you can talk to, okay, that in and of itself can be extremely healing, okay? And maybe you do both. But again, it is completely okay. Asking for help is a sign of strength and not a sign of weakness. It's something I wish I would have done earlier on in my journey, because when I worked with my coach, obviously she helped me a lot, right? I was someone who was already going into my healing journey, but I wanted to get a bit more help, right? I wanted to get a bit more guidance, a bit more help. And we did like inner child work, which is something I forgot to mention earlier as well. In our modalities section, inner child work is also very popular, and it's very, within good reason, because it's a very powerful practice. But again, sometimes they will make you see things that you have not seen before. Maybe they'll give you perspectives that maybe you haven't, thought about before, and obviously tools as well to help you to guide you through your journey. But asking for help is so, so, so important. And also, just to retouch on something earlier that I wanted to share, okay? If you work with a therapist or a coach and it doesn't necessarily go well and that you don't feel seen or heard or understood, I don't want you to stop because you've had a bad experience. I've heard people tell me this before where they've had a bad experience with a therapist or someone they worked with, as an example, okay? But just because you've had a bad experience with someone, I don't want you to stop looking for help, right? Because maybe you and that person just didn't pair up, just didn't match, or, maybe you just generally didn't get the support that you needed and deserved, okay? But I can promise you that there's someone out there that genuinely does want to help you, that will genuinely create that safe container, that space for you to open up your heart and to really help you to go through what you're going through and to help you get from where you are now to where you want to be, okay? So sometimes you need to find or you need to try a few therapists, as an example, right? To really land on the right one. But I know for me, therapy has been great. Coaching has been great. Like it's, again, you just need to find someone who you really connect with, right? And someone that has that you've got a good connection with, because you're going to be working with these people for some time. So it's very important to establish that connection, okay? So again, these are the 5 things that I really want to share today. I hope these help. And listen, there's, a million other things that I can say, but I really wanted to try to keep this, short and simple as well, to the point, but also to really give you insights that I wish I would have had before when I really started. So I hope that this helps, and I hope that these can help you and guide you on your own healing journey.